With that, let's move on to agenda item 3, an audit committee report. We have CAE Debbie Davis with us online, I believe. Is she in the building? Oh, there she is. Perfect. Thank you. Debbie, whenever you're ready, we're on agenda item 3.1.
Yes, so there are 2 items on the agenda. This first one, both items coming from the audit committee, and yes, Chief Audit Executive Debbie Davis. Sorry about that. The first item is regarding a prioritization request that the audit committee discussed for an audit of Utah schools for the deaf and the blind. And you can see in the agenda memo that it speaks to, there are some changes happening with schools for the deaf and blind. Of course, this board is the governing board for schools for the deaf and blind, and the legislature recently took action to move financial operations from schools for the deaf and the blind to the State Board of Education. So with some of the movement there, including, of course, the board has established a standing committee for Utah Schools of the Deaf and the Blind. It was thought by the audit committee that perhaps now would be a good time for an audit. Additionally, there was some action with the Executive Appropriations Committee coming from the Public Education Appropriations Committee that there were some questions that they would like answered. So a lot of this is financial based, but there were other questions as well. And those documents from those legislative committees are included and linked in your packet. So Vice Chair Hart is the audit committee chair, and there's a recommendation for the board. I don't know, Chair Hart, if you want to talk forward the recommended action from audit committee, but that's a little bit of background. I'm happy to speak to it further. Essentially, it would be because of the timelines established by the legislature to receive some information, the audit would need to be done quickly, and so the prioritization request is essentially that it would kind of bump up on the list of prioritized audits to be the next one that would be started and hopefully completed in alignment with those timelines. So Chair Hymas and then
we'll hear from Vice Chair Hart. Let me just ask before we jump into this, I guess it's procedural. I can't remember on audit committee, do we need a second on these ones, or is it treated like the other? Okay, so no second necessary, but Vice Chair Hart.
Yeah, I'd like to put the motion on the table and then we can discuss if needed. I move that the board prioritize an audit of the Utah Schools for the Deaf and Blind, including the financial position of the USDB, and add it to the audit plan before the USBE Advisory Committee's audit.
Thank you. The motion is before the board. Vice Chair Hart, would you like to speak to this motion?
No, we tried to do, we tried to put quite a bit of information, as you can see in the background, so that information is available to you.
Okay. Member Carey.
Thank you, Chair. If I could direct a question to Ms. Davis. How long would the audit take to complete and get the results, and what is the anticipated turnaround time?
This is such a good question, and the audit committee discussed in depth what the workload is of internal audit and if we'd have the capacity to do the audit. So there's kind of 2 deadlines with this that we're looking at. So financial operations will assume administration of financial operations of schools for the deaf and the blind on July 1st. So kind of the first deadline would be to try and get as much work done on the financial position of schools for the deaf and blind before July 1st. That is, of course, recognizing that it's not like a light switch that you just flip on. Our financial operations staff will need to be doing some work in preparation of that. So I anticipate a lot of collaboration if the audit is prioritized by the board. But that would be the first thing that we'd look at is financial position. And then, as outlined in the memo, the Public Education's Appropriations Committee would need information by November. So that would be the second deadline that we would be attempting to meet. And this is a rather large audit, and so I would redirect probably most of my staff to try and do this audit. We would keep one of the audits that we're currently doing is curriculum career and technical education. So we would keep at least one individual on that. We are engaged with LEAs on that, and we don't want to lose all momentum. So we'd keep an individual doing that and then try and meet these other deadlines with as much effort as possible to meet these other deadlines, which it would be a fast turnaround, essentially 6 to 8 months to meet those deadlines.
Yep, follow up, go ahead.
Thank you. So if the financial aspect begins on July 1st, presumably the results of the financial aspect of the audit would need to be completed and reported before then? Is that accurate?
Well, as this is a little bit of new territory trying to meet these fast deadlines. And so I think it would be working with the audit committee and potentially receiving feedback from the board as to how results are reported out. There is precedent with audits to get information or things that we're finding out to individuals that can act upon that information as quickly as possible. So even if there's not a formal report, some of that information can be relayed so action can be taken. But yes, we would try and get that in advance of July 1st. And as mentioned, a lot of collaboration would need to happen with financial operations because before July 1st, they will be needing to work on things in order to prepare to take those operations on July 1st.
One more follow-up?
Thank you, Chair. Would releasing information obtained during an audit prior to the completion of the audit be a departure from the typical practice of our audit committee?
So generally, it is the board that moves to release audits, and of course, audit committee, as you mentioned, recommends release of that. Generally, we've only had one report, and so it moves forward, and we release information. However, during the process, as mentioned, we meet generally on a monthly basis with the superintendency, so they're aware of things that we're finding. Of course, we're getting information from them. So that's a process that has happened. As far as releasing reports at different dates, I don't know that we've done it, but we've definitely seen legislative audit do that, where they start with one audit and then they split it into two. They have a behavioral health, they've split that into three. They have an internal audit that they've now split into two. So taking a concept that's being audited and splitting it as deemed necessary based on what we're finding in an audit is not an unusual audit precedent. Just maybe we personally, internal audit for the board has not done it.
Thank you. We have Vice Chair Wood and then Member Lear, then over to Member Earl.
So I have a question from our USDB Standing Committee perspective. Would we be able to use that information as it goes along? We're in the process of creating this work group that is also legislatively mandated, that is to look at general scope, kind of all of those things that you'll be looking at throughout. But we were looking at a deadline of October for PEA and then November for EAC. Are your deadlines, are we seeing it that way, the same way? And I know on the screen on the memo it said November, but we're looking at it kind of for October. But would we be able to use that information also?
And Chair, if it's okay. Yes, the anticipation of the audit, as with all audits, is to support the work of the board. And so we would want to be cognizant of everything that the board needs from this audit moving forward. So if it is an October deadline, then that is the deadline that we would seek to meet. And then, of course, that's in preparation for November. I think the things that we just have to be careful of when we're doing an audit and following standards is that we're complying with GRAMA and records retention classification. So if something's protected, we're maintaining it as protected. That said, some information can be shared with the board to take action right before a formal release is done. And then also, of course, for board members to make sure you're protected in the work that you're doing in complying with the Open and Public Meetings Act. So we want to be cognizant of that as well, but absolutely in support of the board and what the board needs from the audit.
Thank you. Member Lear?
Oh, you had me in a different order, but thank you. I am very anxious to get on to the next audit item on the list. In fact, it was one that I was particularly interested in. But understanding the timeline that the legislature has imposed without really asking us if we can meet it reasonably, I think it is crucial because of HB 537, the state board and the financial department will be overseeing the USDB budget in a more intense process than it has before. I think it would be irresponsible not to know what we're starting with, not to know the status quo of how USDB is operating and understand all the financial issues. So I think this is crucial as a responsible fiscal manager to understand the current state of USDB, and we absolutely need to do it. The timing is not perfect or optimal, but we were given a directive by the legislature, and I think we need to know where we're starting. So I very much support this, even though it's delaying some things I'm interested in also.
Thank you, Member Lear. Member Earl?
Yeah, I just want to say I do support this. The audit, I think this is a good way forward, especially with what's come from the legislature and their request that this is a good way to get a deep dive prior to November, when we've got to report some things back and when they are also going to be doing some. So I think this gets us that down in the weeds. It gets us the information we need, but it also allows us to, and I think this is what you were kind of saying, is that as we see things come up, that we can immediately start looking at them and saying, what's the processes we could put in place? And I'm grateful we've got the committee that can start to look more detailed at that. So thank you. I support this.
Thank you, Member Earl. Vice Chair Hart?
Yeah, I'd just like to mention that, like CA Davis alluded to, audits can be structured in any which way we want to. So one audit could actually be a couple mini audits so that we can meet those deadlines on the way to a final kind of outcome or project. So we can and we should look at the different components, so to speak, and the different stakeholders and the different timelines and work that into the audit plan. That is something that it will be a little bit more complex. It won't be a one-shot kind of thing. It'll be it'll have a couple of guideposts along the way, and we'll just build that into the plan. So just making that clarification.
Thank you. So the motion before the board is that the board prioritize an audit of the Utah schools for the deaf and the blind, including the financial position of the USDB, and add it to the audit plan before the USBE Advisory Committee's audit. Let's go ahead and vote. Thank you. That passes. 13 in favor, 1 in opposition. That opposition coming from Member Carey. Back to you, Debbie, for agenda item 3.2.
This agenda item is a request for a reallocation, if you will, from the board's budget specifically to internal audit for an additional FTE. This came about when I was meeting with our financial operations staff. We do it every year to plan the next year, talk about any needs that there are. And I mentioned the potential of using our carry forward funds to hire a time-limited position to help with the work that we have in internal audit. And we just the board just prioritized an audit. So, right, there's work for internal audit to do, and I can tell you with complete confidence that all of my staff are working flat out 100% to do the work to support the board. So as part of that conversation, our assistant superintendent, Deborah Jacobson, mentioned that a full-time FTE ongoing, it's easier to hire that person and an individual of higher caliber. And so she was very willing to look at the board's budget, and internal audit is, of course, part of the board's budget. So it's just reallocating or moving funds from one place in the board to internal audit, and she looked and identified funds. You can see in the memo approximately $155,000 to hire a staff auditor. It would be starting in state fiscal year 2026, and then internal audit would use our carry forward funds so that we could hire an individual immediately should the board approve this budget request reallocation. But that's a little bit of background. It's just in support of internal audit, continuing to support the board and trying to complete our projects in a timely manner so that the board will have relevant information in your policymaking.
Thank you. Any questions or a motion would be in order? Member Vice Chair Hart?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion that we reallocate 155,000 of the ongoing budget, the internal audit of the internal audit department, starting in school fiscal year 2026, to the internal audit department to hire 1 FTE and approve the internal audit department to use prior year carry forward funds to fund the FTE for the remainder of school fiscal year 2025. or
Thank
state
you,
fiscal year.
Vice Chair Hart. The motion has been stated. Would you like to speak to that motion? Oh, not out of committee, apparently.
I don't need to speak. I don't.
Okay,
I waive.
okay. With that, let's go ahead and vote. That passes unanimously. Thank you, Debbie. With that, of course, with the